Why did America deliberately destroy its machine tool industry? In 1945, the United States built more machine tools than the rest of the world combined. The lathes, mills, and grinders that cut the parts for every car, every aircraft, every artillery shell a nation can produce. Whoever builds them decides what a country is able to manufacture, and for a generation, America built nearly all of them. Today, America ranks fourth, and when the Army needed to triple artillery shell production for Ukraine, it learned it could not simply buy the machines to do it. But this industry was never defeated in the marketplace. It was dismantled by decisions with dates and signatures on them, and the paperwork survives. You are watching Trade Archive. You think stories like this deserve to be told. Like this video and subscribe before the story starts, because this one comes with a paper trail, and we are going to read it out loud. For most of the 20th century, you could stand almost anywhere in America and put your hand on this industry's work. The Bridgeport. In the corner of the shop that turned your brake rotors, a machine so common its name became the word for a milling machine. The South Bend lathe your high school kept in the metal shop. The Cincinnati name cast into the iron of the machines that cut the parts of the car in your driveway. Ask what happened to the companies behind those names, and you will hear the same three answers everyone hears. The Japanese, the recession, the computer. Each one carries just enough truth to end the conversation, and ending the conversation is exactly what each one was allowed to do for 40 years. Because none of those three answers can explain the strangest fact in the record. In the spring of 1983, the government of the United States studied this industry, concluded in writing that it was being damaged, and then recommended, unanimously, that nothing be done, quietly. The plan for telling the press was one word long: none. To understand how a country talks itself into that, you need one name. It was typed onto a petition in the summer of 1982. It was argued over in the cabinet room of the White House. And by the time it reached that room, the name already meant something else, something almost nobody saying it out loud understood. We will get to the name. First, you need to stand inside what was lost, because you cannot weigh a thing you have never seen run. America's dominance in 1945 was not pure genius. It was partly an accident of geography, the only major industrial base on Earth the war never touched. But what America did with that head start was genuine, and to see it, follow the Black River into southern Vermont, to a town of about 9,000 people called Springfield. The machine tool world had another name for that stretch of river: Precision Valley. It began with a machinist named James Hartness, who took over the Jones Lamson works in the 1880s and built a flat turret lathe the whole industry copied. Hartness hired brilliant men and lost them in the best possible way. Edwin Fellows left and founded the Fellows Gear Shaper Company just up the road. William Bryant left and founded Bryant Chucking Grinder. Within a generation, one small valley held three of the most respected machine tool builders on Earth, and during the Second World War, by the town's own accounting, its shops produced roughly a fifth of the nation's machine tools. Local historians still repeat the claim that Springfield sat seventh on the enemy's list of American bombing targets. Whether that ranking was ever real, the fact that a town of 9,000 believed it tells you what the work meant. Understand what the work was. A machine tool is not a drill from the hardware store. It is a multi-ton iron casting whose sliding ways are scraped flat by hand, a few 10,000ths at a time, by men who spent years learning to read the bearing pattern under a straight edge. A Bryant grinder could hold a tenth, not a tenth of an inch. A 10,000th, finer than a 50th of the width of a human hair, held hour after hour in a brick building beside a river. The men who did that work did not think of themselves as labor. They thought of themselves as the standard. Everything else was measured against, because mechanically speaking, they were. And the bargain around the work was real. A Springfield kid walked out of high school into an apprenticeship and spent the next 4 decades inside the same gates. A machinist named Raymond Streeter joined Jones Lamson as a teenage apprentice in 1926 and stayed 50 years. Asked about the place, he needed 4 words. Machine tools are this town. The paychecks proved him right. They went to the grocer on Main Street, to the diner that filled at shift change, to the barber who knew which shift a man worked by the hour he came in, to the bank that wrote 30-year mortgages on the strength of a J&L badge. The whole valley ran on the second shift's overtime. When the plants were busy, the furniture store on the corner carried families on credit until the bonus checks came because everyone understood the rhythm and everyone trusted it. 3 factories held up a valley, the valley held up the families, and the families never had a reason to believe it could end. For a long time, it looked permanent. The ending began, strangely, with an American triumph. In 1949, a Michigan manufacturer named John Parsons convinced the Air Force to fund a radical idea, a machine tool guided not by a machinist's hands, but by numbers. Parsons took a contract worth about $200,000 and brought in the Servo Mechanisms Laboratory at MIT, and in 1952, in a lab in Cambridge, a modified Cincinnati Hydrotel milling machine cut metal under numerical control for the first time anywhere. America had just invented the future of its own industry, with public money, years ahead of the world. Parsons would eventually receive the National Medal of Technology for it. Then, America aimed the invention at the wrong target. Because the Pentagon paid the bills, numerical control grew up as aerospace exotica, enormous, temperamental, priced for the Air Force. The tens of thousands of ordinary job shops that were the real market were ignored. Japanese builders did the opposite. Fanuc standardized the control, builders like Mazak wrapped it in simple, reliable, affordable machines, and they put them on ships. American trade press conceded as early as 1960 that Japanese machines had reached world class, and Japan had one more weapon that had nothing to do with technology. Delivery. Order from a major American builder in the 70s, and the backlog could run past a year. The Japanese machine arrived in weeks. The men on the floor felt it before anyone upstairs would say it. And the floor in Springfield had a new problem of its own, because the people upstairs were no longer steel-spectacled machine men. In 1964, Jones Lamson was bought by Textron, a conglomerate that collected companies the way other men collect coins, and decisions moved to a boardroom out of state. The town's own historian, Hugh Putnam, points to one of them. J&L refused to put anything but American controls on its machines, in the years when the Japanese controls were plainly better. A workforce that had numbered 1,200 fell to about 200 by 1981. Then, the sky fell on everyone at once. Between 1981 and 1983, American machine tool sales collapsed from about $5 billion to about $2 billion. Industry employment dropped by a third in 24 months, and between 1982 and 1987, roughly half of all American machine tool companies closed their doors. Half. Imports, about a tenth of the market in 1973, would come to supply roughly 3/4 of the numerically controlled machines sold in America. That is where the familiar story stops, with the Japanese and the recession arriving together like weather. But the real answer was not out on the ocean. It was already written down, and the first document in the chain was signed before the recession even began, in a boardroom in Fort Lauderdale. In May of 1979, a mid-sized industrial conglomerate headquartered in Florida became the test case for a brand-new American invention, the large leveraged buyout. A young Wall Street firm called Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, the KKR that would soon become a household name, took the company private for somewhere between $355 and $390 million, paying $40 a share for stock that had traded near 15, and putting up, by most accounts, barely $1 million of its own money. The rest was debt, and the debt was hung on the company itself. Among the things that company owned was a machine tool builder in Los Angeles called Burgmaster, by most accounts the largest machine tool maker west of the Mississippi, a business built by an immigrant machinist named Fred Berg around a turret drill he designed on his own kitchen table. From the day the buyout closed, Burgmaster's cash no longer belonged to new spindles, new controls, or new engineers. It belonged to lenders. The historian Max Holland, whose own father spent decades as a machinist at Burgmaster, wrote the definitive account of what came next, and he records the message the division president, Alan Folger, received from above as the squeeze tightened. Burgmaster is not generating a sufficient return on its assets. Hold that sentence. Not losing money. It wasn't. Not building bad machines. That was arguable and fixable. A sufficient return on its assets, a factory full of skilled people, judged by an instrument with a single needle, and found wanting. Because in the summer of 1982, with the recession at full force and Japanese machines flooding in, that same Florida conglomerate went to Washington and filed a petition unlike anything the government had seen. 714 pages, prepared by the Covington and Burling lawyer Richard Kopakin at a cost somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000. It alleged that Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry had organized the Japanese builders into a cartel, and it asked the president to fight back by denying the investment tax credit to anyone buying Japanese machine tools. The company's president, Philip O'Reilly, stumped the country for it personally. On December 21, 1982, the United States Senate passed a resolution urging the president to act, and it passed unanimously. Not one senator, of either party, voted no. The answer came in a meeting, and we know nearly everything about it because the government wrote it down and later declassified it. On April 22, 1983, at 3 in the afternoon, President Reagan was briefed on the petition in the cabinet room. 30 minutes were allotted. The briefing paper survives in the Reagan Presidential Library. A special interagency working group, chaired by Edwin Harper, the deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget, had studied the case, and its written conclusion was that the American numerically controlled machine tool industry, quote, is damaged by various Japanese practices designed to support their industry at the expense of ours. The same paper then records, quote, the unanimous view of the working group that this action should not be taken. It notes the matter, quote, is being handled as quietly as possible. And at the bottom, where every White House briefing paper states the plan for informing the press, this one holds a single word: none. Read the guest list for that half hour. Edwin Meese to open the discussion, George Shultz from State, Donald Regan from Treasury, David Stockman from Budget, Martin Feldstein from the Council of Economic Advisors, James Baker, the Chief of Staff, William Brock, the Trade Representative, and Commerce Secretary Malcolm Baldrige, the one genuine trade hawk in the room, a man the press would later describe as all but ignored inside his own administration whenever he argued for a harder line. The economic agencies argued that using the tax code against imports would distort markets and invite retaliation, and the economic agencies won. 5 days later, on April 27, 1983, the New York Times reported the outcome under a 5-word headline: Who Dial? Rebuffed on Import Petition. Who Dial? That is the name, and now you can feel what almost nobody in that room said out loud. Who Dial was both halves of this story at once. The company standing before the Senate blaming a foreign cartel was the same company that had spent 4 years being hollowed out by an American buyout, its factory's earnings diverted to debt service, its machine tool division told it was not generating a sufficient return on its assets. The name on the petition was the name on the loan documents. Japan was real, the recession was real, and neither one was the reason Bergmaster could not invest in its own future. Line the papers up in order. A buyout in 1979 that redirected the cash. A doctrine, spoken inside the company, that measured a factory by a single number. A petition in 1982 that pointed the public's anger overseas. And a briefing paper in 1983 in which the government conceded the damage and chose, unanimously and quietly, to let it proceed. Assembled in that order, it stops looking like weather. It starts looking like a choice, made twice, in the boardroom and in the cabinet room, by men reading the same instrument. And here is the twist that proves the instrument had a life of its own. The petition failed, and the machine that actually killed Bergmaster did not so much as pause. In January 1986, Bergmaster was auctioned off. Later that year, Hyundai went through a second leveraged recapitalization, and by Holland's account, its debt climbed from 103% of capitalization to 152%. Its new junk bonds paying nearly 14% at a time when ordinary rates ran under 10. In 1987, a British conglomerate took what was left and kept a single division. Philip O'Reilly, the man who had carried the alarm to Washington, was forced into retirement at 61, and, per Holland, he spent his later years blaming first the Japanese and then the administration for 2,200 skilled jobs that vanished on his watch. He never publicly blamed the buyout. The buyout firm, meanwhile, moved on to bigger deals, and the model it tested on Hyundai spread through American industry like a proof of concept. Clyde Prestowitz, who fought these battles from inside the Commerce Department, later wrote that in all his years there, he never once heard an economist from the economic agencies argue for relief for an American industry. The administration sometimes bowed to political necessity, he said, but never willingly. Watch the same instrument pass through the rest of the industry's royalty, because Bergmaster was not an isolated case. It was the pattern's first clean demonstration, and the pattern traveled. Bridgeport itself, the company whose name had become the generic word for a milling machine, the machine in 10,000 high school shops and 10,000 more garages, had been swallowed by Textron back in 1968, an early trophy of the same conglomeration wave that took Jones and Lamson. When the parent needed cash for its next acquisition in the 80s, Bridgeport went on the block like a used car. The name that meant American precision to two generations of machinists became a line item to be sold when the quarter demanded it. Warner and Swazi, the great Cleveland turret lathe house whose machines had cut shells for 2 world wars, was bought by Bendix in 1980, then passed hand to hand, owner to owner, each one further from the shop floor than the last, until the name was simply shut off in 1992. Cincinnati Millicron, once the largest machine tool builder on earth, the company Springfield men called the Mill, read the same scoreboard and drew the logical conclusion. It spent the 80s walking away from machine tools toward plastics machinery, where the returns were fatter, and finally sold the machine tool business entirely in 1998. The ground where its old headquarters stood now holds a strip mall, and Ingersoll of Rockford, Illinois, whose giant mills cut the structural parts of American aircraft, went bankrupt in 2003. Its production systems division was bought by the Dalian Machine Tool Group of China. The company that had helped build the American aerospace industry was carried off, in pieces, to help build a competitor's. Different towns, different products, one instrument. The owners changed, the debt arrived, the investment stopped, and every time, the floor went quiet. Washington, meanwhile, spent those same years arguing with itself on paper. In March of 1983, the same spring Hyundai was rebuffed. The Machine Tool Builders Association filed a different petition under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, arguing that imports now threatened national security itself. In February 1984, Secretary Baldrige delivered a report to the president, concluding the threat was real. In March 1984, the White House sent it back for further study. 2 more years passed, the deadliest 2 years in the industry's history. In March 1986, an updated report found imports threatened national security in 7 of 18 machine tool categories, and on May 20, 1986, Reagan finally said in public what his government had conceded in private 3 years earlier, declaring the industry a small yet vital component of the U.S. defense base, and announcing voluntary restraint agreements. The next day, he signed National Security Decision Directive 226, titled Machine Tools and National Security. Japan and Taiwan agreed to 5-year limits starting January 1, 1987. West Germany and Switzerland refused outright, and nothing happened to them. Hold the 2 government documents side by side. In 1983, the industry is damaged, and the unanimous recommendation is to do nothing, quietly. In 1986, the same industry is vital to the national defense. Same industry, same competitor, same government. The only thing that changed was which doctrine held the pen, and by the time the second document was signed, half the patient was already in the ground. Now, honesty, because this story opened by handing you 3 explanations. The Japanese machines really were better. By the late 70s, they were often cheaper, more reliable, and delivered in weeks instead of a year. And the historians who later examined Hudale's cartel allegation, Holland among them, found it thin. Japanese builders won mostly the honest way, and no cartel forced a single American shop owner's hand. The computer transition really was fumbled, and much of the fumbling was self-inflicted, from the Air Force steering the technology toward aerospace exotica to Jones and Lamson refusing better foreign controls out of loyalty. The recession really was the worst demand collapse the industry ever faced. And if you believe all of that together made American machine tool building impossible, consider that in 1983, at the absolute bottom, a machinist named Gene Haas started building rotary tables in a small California shop in the highest-cost state in the country, and grew it into the largest machine tool builder in America. Every excuse the giants gave, Haas disproved in real time. But notice the one thing none of it can do. A recession cannot sign a leveraged buyout. A competitor in Nagoya never voted to send Bergmaster's earnings to bondholders instead of new machines. An import cannot sit in the cabinet room, concede in writing that an industry is being damaged, and recommend that nothing be done. Those are decisions. Each one carries a date, a page number, and names typed underneath. The 3 famous reasons were true enough to end the conversation. The paperwork is what the conversation was protecting. Springfield found out what the paperwork decided. Textron announced in September 1983 that it was leaving Vermont. The next year, local investors tried to buy the flagship plant back into hometown hands, a rescue attempt earnest enough to make the national papers, and it was not enough. The Valley's shops passed to owners ever more distant until a holding company called Goldman Industrial Group ended it on February 13, 2002, declaring bankruptcy and going dark on 790,000 square feet of industrial space in a single filing. Now go back for the grocer, the barber, the diner, and the furniture store that carried families on credit. They did not decline over a comfortable generation. They emptied. The furniture store does not extend credit against a bonus check when the bonus checks stop, and the plant that wrote them is a fenced lot. The barber cannot tell a man's shift by the hour he arrives when there is no shift. The bank that wrote 30-year mortgages on the strength of a J and L badge outlived the badge by decades, and the paper it had underwritten quietly went bad. An entire ecosystem, built across a century to stand on 3 factories, came down in the order the factories fell. The Jones and Lamson works stood for years afterward with ivy through the windows and PCBS and solvent in the ground beneath it, until the state paid $3.7 million just to tear it down and clean what was left. Household income in Springfield now runs about $10,000 below the Vermont median, Roughly a third of the town receives some form of public assistance, and the region's own development director has said the town's traffic problem these days is drug dealers. Raymond Streeter said, "Machine tools are this town." Both halves of that sentence came true. If the machine that did this had retired in the 80s, this would be a history video. It is not, and to prove it, I am not going to show you a chart about China. I am going to show you one company, because every thread of this story ties off in the same place. It was precision royalty for 130 years. It inherited the Bridgeport name itself in 2004, and it died in our own decade by the same instrument, move for move. The company is Hardinge of Elmira, New York. Move 1, the buyout. In May 2018, a private investment fund called Privet took Hardinge private at $18.50 a share, about $245 million, financed with debt from a private lender. Move 2, the hollowing. The headquarters left Elmira, the company's home since the 1890s, for an office outside Philadelphia, and the distance between the executives and the floor became policy, the same deliberate distance Textron had put between itself and Springfield half a century before. Move 3, the end. In 2024, Harding filed for Chapter 11 in Delaware. Its lender took the remains with a $100 million credit bid. A liquidation plan was confirmed that December, and the federal pension insurer filed a claim for nearly $22 million in shortfalls owed to the machinists who had built the company's name. 1979, Bergmaster. 2018, Harding. 45 years apart, the same three moves, and once again it was nobody's scandal, because none of it was hidden. It was filed. And the country is now discovering, in real time, what the absence costs. I am not going to argue the national security case in the abstract, because in February 2022, it stopped being abstract. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States went looking for the capacity to make one of the simplest heavy weapons in the arsenal, the 155mm artillery shell, a steel cylinder whose basic design predates the automobile. American plants were making about 14,400 of them a month. Ukraine was firing that many in a matter of days. So the Pentagon did what a rich country does. It opened the checkbook, committing more than $5 billion to expand production, and it ran straight into the thing this whole story has been about. You cannot buy capacity you no longer build. The forges and the heavy machine tools that shape and finish a shell are themselves enormous machines, and America does not make many of them anymore, and neither does anyone who will sell them quickly. The Army's own acquisition chief, Douglas Bush, explained the bottleneck to reporters in March 2023 in one plain sentence about these building-sized machines. You don't just go buy it from a parking lot somewhere. Read that sentence again, slowly, and hear what is inside it. That is the man responsible for buying weapons for the United States Army, the richest military customer on the planet, explaining that there are machines his government simply cannot get, on any budget, in the country that invented the way those machines are controlled. The lead time he was fighting was not measured in weeks. It was measured in years, because the supplier base that could have filled the order in 1975 does not exist. By late 2024, after 2 years and billions of dollars, output had roughly tripled, still short of the goal, still waiting above all on machine tools. Now stand that next to where the industry actually lives today. In the most recent full world survey, China produced about $27 billion of machine tools, nearly 2.5 times second-place Germany, with America fourth at around $8 billion. China is now the largest producer, the largest consumer, and the largest exporter of machine tools on Earth. The country that in 1945 built more of these machines than everyone else combined now buys the tools that build its weapons from the industrial base of a strategic rival. The industry that decides what a nation can manufacture did not disappear. It changed address. The machinists of Precision Valley had a creed, and you can still hear it from the old-timers on the forums where they gather now that the shops are gone. Keep your head down, hold your tolerances, and the work will protect you. Be good enough, be precise enough, be indispensable enough, and no one can touch you. It was the most honest belief in American industrial life, and it was wrong, because the work was never the thing being measured. A man who could hold a 10,000th thought he was safe because his skill was real and rare and hard-won, and it was all three of those things. But the room that decided his future was not judging his skill. It was reading a single number, return on assets, 4 times a year. And against that number, a lifetime of learned precision counted for nothing. There was always a room where the measuring was done, and no apprenticeship, however long, led to a chair in it. Bergmaster in 1979 and Harding in 2018 were 45 years apart, built by different men in different states making different machines, and the shop floors of both did their jobs correctly right up until the day the doors closed. Neither one did a single thing wrong. That is the part that should keep you up. Doing the work well was never the protection they were promised it would be, because the people holding the pen were never grading the work. The machine tools that made America were ended by decision, and the decisions are still on file under one name that meant 2 things at once in a briefing paper whose plan for telling you was a single word: none. If this video resonated with you, do 2 things before you go. Subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments if you or anyone you know lived through the fall of the American machine tool industry. The next video is already on screen. See you there.